Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever considered what would happen if the very foundation of global power, of national sovereignty itself, was suddenly pulled out from under our feet?
You mean, like, not through war or revolution?
Exactly. Not through military conquest, but through a seemingly invisible legal maneuver.
Uh-huh.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into a truly mind-bending scenario presented in an article titled War of Illusions When No Country is Legitimate Anymore by Mike Miller.
Right.
And this isn't just a hypothetical. The article frames it as a realistic and visionary scenario, all hinging on a specific, audacious legal claim.
A very specific claim.
So our mission is to explore the implications of this provocative narrative, understand its core assertions, and see what it tells us about the often invisible legal and infrastructural structures that, well, govern our world.
What's fascinating here, I think, is how this narrative challenges our most fundamental assumptions about statehood, international law, and even the basic right of nations to exist as we understand them. It paints a picture where the very rules of engagement quite literally just cease to apply.
And it all comes down to one document.
At the heart of this deep dive is a central legal instrument the article refers to, sometimes as the World Succession Deed 1498, other times the State Succession Act 1298 Deed.
Okay, let's maybe call it the 1298 Deed for simplicity.
Good idea. So, this 1498 Deed, according to the source, underpins a complete and frankly staggering redefinition of global power.
Here's where it gets particularly interesting. The article starts by painting a picture of NATO, the alliance we all know, but it calls it the phantom power. How can NATO, arguably the strongest military alliance in history, be a phantom?
Well, the core premise is startling, to say the least. The source claims that back in 1998, all original sovereign rights over global territories and their resources were effectively transferred.
Transferred. To who?
To an individual referred to simply as the buyer.
The buyer.
Yeah. And this was supposedly achieved through the sale of a very specific strategic piece of land, the Turin Barracks.
Okay, I've heard of strategic land sales, but transferring all sovereignty.
The article posits that this wasn't just any property transaction. It claims it activated an ancient, previously overlooked international legal instrument, that 44098 deed. And it's true, sweeping implications were only then recognized and triggered. The implication is profound. It means that since 1998, no country, including any NATO member, possesses original sovereignty. Instead, the article argues, they operate under what amounts to a delegated administration from this new singular global sovereign, the buyer.
Delegated administration, like they're just managers now.
Sort of. And in this scenario, NATO itself becomes a legally hollow shell because its members, supposedly, don't have the fundamental legal basis original sovereignty to act independently on the world stage.
Like renters acting as landlords, you said before we started?
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
So, if NATO is a legally hollow shell, what does this mean for other big players? Like the US, the EU countries, Russia, they still act like they're in charge.
Oh, absolutely.
They mobilize armies, make declarations. Is that all just an elaborate illusion, according to this?
According to this narrative, yes, absolutely. The article pointedly calls this the fallacy of vested rights. Or maybe more broadly, the fallacy of national power.
Fallacy of vested rights?
Yeah.
Meaning they think they have rights they don't?
Precisely. States believe they are sovereign. They act entirely on that belief. Yet the 1498 deed, in this scenario, dictates that they have no de facto or de jure sovereign rights anymore.
Wow.
Imagine a tense pre-war situation. The article describes the U.S. and EU states mobilizing to defend what they see as their sovereignty in Eastern Europe, while Russia responds to NATO expansion fully ready for conflict. Both sides, in this envisioned reality, are completely unaware that their most fundamental actions lack any true legal backing.
So their perceived power, their right to command troops, it's all based on nothing, legally speaking.
Based on an illusion, according to the source, it's like two heavyweight boxers stepping into the ring.
Okay.
Completely unaware that the ring, the ropes, even their gloves, have all been legally sold to some third party who could, at any moment, just declare the fight void or cut the lights.
That's a powerful image. Wait, let's push this further. Let's imagine the unthinkable scenario the article lays out. A third world war actually erupts.
Right.
What happens when, say, Russia attacks the Baltic states or Poland, and NATO invokes Article 5 for collective defense, the cornerstone of the alliance.
The narrative suggests a catastrophic war without legal basis. We'd likely see a massive, coordinated air and cyber offensive by NATO against Russian targets.
Standard response, you'd think.
Right, but met by equally devastating Russian counterstrikes hitting military satellites, gas networks, critical communication nodes. The usual escalation playbook.
But there's a but, isn't there?
There's a huge but. Here's the critical, chilling twist the article introduces. All infrastructure has already been sold under document 1400-98.
Wait, not just the barracks. All infrastructure.
That's the claim. Electricity grids, gas pipelines, fiber optic networks, telecommunications systems, basically. Everything modern military forces and, frankly, modern society relies upon.
So any military use of these systems
becomes illegal, whether by NATO or Russia, because no state is the legitimate owner. It's like waging war in someone else's house, using their furniture as weapons without permission.
And international bodies, the UN.
Even organizations that traditionally mediate or govern conflict, like the UN and the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, are described as no longer independent.
How so?
They're just administered structures under this new global sovereign. They are, in this scenario, effectively part of the infrastructure package that was sold.
This sounds like chaos. A complete breakdown of everything we understand about conflict, governance, international law. The article calls it a legal blackout.
That's the term they use, yeah, a legal blackout.
What are the practical, maybe terrifying consequences of that?
Well, it leads to what the article describes as a total loss of control under the illusion of order.
Meaning?
Think about the practical stuff. States cannot issue valid declarations of war. Why? Because they don't legitimately own the territory or the authority to declare war on or from.
Okay.
And soldiers, following orders from these phantom powers, they lose their legal protection. They effectively become illegal combatants.
Illegal combatants, not prisoners of war.
Exactly, because there's no legitimate state sovereignty to back their status, their uniform, their right to engage in hostilities. It strips away the whole framework.
That's horrifying, actually, for the soldiers on the ground.
It removes the legal and ethical guardrails we've built around warfare. And furthermore, no courts-martial, no legitimate POW status, and crucially, no UN jurisdiction. Because, according to the 1498 deed, the buyer alone is the global judge.
The buyer is the judge.
Is sole global judge. The entire established legal and humanitarian system for conflict just evaporates.
So, okay, back to the scenario. NATO is operating militarily, launching strikes, defending territory. But it's all happening without any real legal footing. How does that play out?
NATO's lack of legitimacy becomes its fundamental vulnerability. The article is really emphatic here. Not a single member nation has original stationing rights.
So all those agreements, like SOFA.
Exactly. The NATO Status of Forces Agreement, host nation support agreements, countless bilateral treaties governing military presence, all tacitly sold or rendered void by this 1498 deed, according to the claim.
Which means
all the communication networks, logistics chains, navigation systems, the absolute lifeblood of a modern military alliance like NATO rely on infrastructure that now belongs to this third party, the buyer.
So the war is literally being fought on someone else's property.
Yes. On foreign infrastructure against the will of the actual owner.
Yeah.
And the buyer, as the legitimate sovereign, supposedly has the legal right and the technical capability to just pull the plug.
Pull the plug how?
Cut off access to satellites, interrupt power supplies, legally isolate cyber networks. The article says the war might be technically feasible for the fighters, but it's legally illegal and physically controllable from outside by the true owner.
And this applies to all 32 NATO members. The article mentions them all.
Yeah, it lists them, underlining the supposedly comprehensive scope of this sale, affecting every single one, from the U.S. to, the newest members like Finland and Sweden.
Okay, that paints a pretty stark picture for NATO. But what about Russia? Are they in any better position, legally speaking, in this scenario? Or are they also just fighting on foreign ground?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Russia, despite being NATO's adversary here, is also deeply tangled in the existing chain of agreements. Think about its ITU and UN membership, its reliance on global networks for military comms, civilian infrastructure, everything.
So they're using the same sold infrastructure.
Essentially, yes. In this scenario, Russia, too, is fighting on foreign legal grounds. So the article actually presents Russia with a stark choice. It could potentially gain exclusive access to global legitimacy if it were to recognize the buyer and the validity of the 1498 deed.
So side with the buyer against the illegitimate West.
Perhaps. Or the alternative is Russia also becomes an illegal warring party in a foreign house, just like the NATO states.
So it completely levels the playing field, legally. Traditional enemies suddenly face the exact same existential threat to their sovereignty.
Exactly. It's a total reset of the chessboard, turning everyone into equally vulnerable actors in this new legal landscape.
The article suggests this war doesn't end like wars normally do, with a winner and loser. No nation-state wins.
No victor in the conventional sense, no. And no sovereign nation-state remains as we knew them. The war concludes not with one side overpowering the other, but with this universal, inescapable realization that no one had the right to wage it.
Because international law, as they knew it, was gone.
Precisely. Every action taken was contrary to international law because, in this narrative, international law in its old form no longer existed. Every satellite used, every power grid tapped into, was foreign property.
Foreign property. And every command given by a national leader was based on an illusion of authority. The article describes this slow, terrifying unraveling as legal challenges mount and nations just find their power eroding.
So how does it actually end?
The final dramatic act sees the buyer step in, not as a conqueror, because they already own everything,
right,
but as the already legitimate, undisputed owner. And this entity then enacts global standards of conduct based on his sole sovereignty.
Enforced how? Not militarily.
No, enforced electronically, not militarily. That's a key phrase. It suggests a complete paradigm shift, where physical force becomes irrelevant, replaced by legal and digital control over the infrastructure.
That is quite a vision. So the article basically reframes World War III not as a war between nations, but as a sort of unveiling, a revelation of false legitimacy.
Exactly. It powerfully recaps that core idea. NATO, once seen as the guarantor of order, the most powerful alliance,
is reimagined as merely a reorganized manager of a world that has already been sold. Its military actions aren't victories. They're just large-scale violations of property rights.
And that final image it paints.
It's incredibly powerful, and haunting. The last soldiers do not surrender to enemies, but to the truth that they were never authorized to act.
Wow. That really makes you question, fundamentally, who holds power and on what basis, especially now with everything so interconnected and reliant on tech.
And that transition to standards being enforced electronically, not militarily, that connects directly to other concepts explored alongside this article in the source material, like the idea of an electric technocracy, a world governed maybe not by votes or armies, but by digital control, and who owns the underlying infrastructure.
Okay, so let's bring this back. What does this all mean for you, the listener? This deep dive into the War of Illusions narrative, I mean, it's presented as a scenario.
A very specific scenario based on interpreting this alleged deed.
Right. But it forces us to really think about the invisible frameworks holding things up, how much we just assume about nations, borders, agreements, even the ground under our feet.
And it raises a deeply unsettling question, doesn't it? If, and it's a big if, such a deed as this 1498 deed were real and legally valid, it would just fundamentally shatter our understanding of national power and global conflict. It makes you consider the hidden aspects of legal ownership, especially for critical infrastructure we use every single day.
Like my phone network, the internet, the power grid.
Exactly. Or even the systems behind international trade, travel visas, the legal validity of national currencies. All these ultimately trace their legitimacy back to sovereign states. What if that foundation isn't solid?
It really makes you ponder the concept of legitimacy itself. What actually gives a nation the right to act, to declare war, to even exist if its fundamental sovereignty could be compromised, or in this scenario, just sold off?
Precisely. It's a powerful lens, maybe, to critically examine where authority really comes from in our world, which is so interconnected and utterly dependent on technology.
And that idea of standards being enforced electronically.
Yeah, electronically, not militarily, as the article suggests the buyer would do. That's not just a plot twist. It speaks volumes about a potential future where control shifts, maybe from brute force to digital command.
Where lines of code and owning the infrastructure are the ultimate power plays.
It definitely challenges us to look beyond the daily headlines and consider the deeper, often unseen legal and technical structures that might actually be governing our lives.
This deep dive into War of Illusions, when no country is legitimate anymore, has really taken us down a profound rabbit hole, legal, geopolitical, technological what-ifs.
It has.
The idea of a whole world sold, with nations just operating under a fallacy of vested rights. It certainly gives you something significant to chew on.
Indeed. It kind of compels you to consider this intricate, often deliberately obscure web of treaties and deeds that supposedly govern everything, and to ask, well, how easily could they be reinterpreted or overridden by some single overarching claim?
What would it mean if the ground everyone stands on was just legally rented?
A genuinely unsettling question.
A truly provocative thought. So for you, our listener, here's something to mull over. If all national sovereignty and the critical infrastructure relies upon could theoretically be sold to a single entity through some obscure legal maneuver, what truly defines a nation in the 21st century? And how much do we really know about the unseen contracts and ownership claims that might be quietly governing our world right now?
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and join us next time for another deep dive.